So Pfizer just threw down $10 billion to crash the weight loss drug party. And they did it by outplaying their biggest rival in a wild weekend showdown. But here's the question. Did they just overpay for a lottery ticket? And what's this mean for the massive $150 billion market up for grabs? All right, let's get into it.
And look, that's not just hyperbole. That's a direct quote from a major shareholder at Mitsera, the company right in the middle of this whole thing. It just perfectly sums up the sheer intensity of this battle for the future of obesity drugs. Okay, let's cut right to the chase. After a really dramatic weekend, Pfizer came out on top. They've officially sealed the deal for the biotech firm Mitsera and its super promising pipeline. This is a massive, massive win for Pfizer, and you have to say, a pretty big setback for Novo Nordisk.
So what does it take to win a war like this? Well, let's break down exactly what Pfizer put on the table.
Here it is, the big headline number. $10 billion. That's the total potential price tag Pfizer offered to snatch Mitsera away and make sure it didn't fall into Novo Nordisk's hands.
But here's where it gets really smart. Look at how they structured this deal. Pfizer isn't just writing a check for the whole amount upfront. Nope. A pretty big piece of it, over $20 a share, is what's called a Contingent Value Right, or CVR. You can basically think of it as a performance bonus. If Mitsera's drugs actually work and get approved, then the shareholders get that extra payout. It's a really clever way for Pfizer to de-risk this huge gamble.
All right, so how did this all blow up so quickly? I mean, this wasn't some long, drawn-out negotiation. This was a lightning-fast brawl between two giants over one incredible weekend.
You can see it right here on the timeline. Back in September, Pfizer probably thought they had this in the bag with a $7.3 billion offer. But then, bam, in early November, Novo Nordisk swoops in out of nowhere with a better deal. That forced Pfizer's hand. So Pfizer comes back over the top with that $10 billion knockout punch, and just one day later, Novo is out. The whole thing was a whirlwind.
So this is the really big question, right? Why did Novo Nordisk just walk away? They clearly wanted this company. So what happened? Well, it turns out it wasn't just about the money.
So, the company put out this very final-sounding statement, making their exit official. But behind the scenes, the real story wasn't the price tag. The real story was the massive regulatory headache they were staring down. And this, right here, this is the smoking gun. It came from Mitsera's own board. They basically said that a deal with Novo Nordisk, who's already a giant in the obesity market, was just way too risky from a legal and regulatory perspective.
And here's why. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, actually sent a letter to both companies. And that letter was a pretty clear warning that a Novo-Mitsera merger could get shut down on antitrust grounds. For Mitsera's board, that was game over. Pfizer's offer was clean, Novo's was a potential legal nightmare that could have been stuck in the courts for who knows how long. So what did Pfizer actually get for $10 billion? I mean, what does Mitsera have that made two of the biggest drug companies in the world go to war over it? These are the crown jewels. Two experimental drugs, and yeah, they're still unproven, but one is a GLP-1, which is the same type of drug as the blockbusters from Novo and Lilly you've heard so much about. The other one works on a totally different hormone, so this gives Pfizer 2 shots on goal in the hottest market in pharma right now. It's a huge strategic move. And the potential payoff? Well, analysts at Leerink Partners think that these two drugs together could pull in $5 billion in peak annual sales. $5 billion. You see numbers like that, and you start to understand why Pfizer was willing to pay up. And this quote from Pfizer's former head of R&D just nails it. You have to remember, Pfizer has kind of stumbled with their own weight loss drugs. So for them, this wasn't just a nice-to-have, this was a must-have deal to secure their future in a massive growth market. Okay, so we get the strategy, it makes sense. But if you're an investor, $10 billion for drugs that aren't even approved yet, well, it definitely makes you ask the question. This is exactly what Wall Street is trying to figure out right now. Is the potential reward here really worth that huge upfront risk? Or is Pfizer just being a little too optimistic about how this all plays out? And here's the heart of the concern. There's a real worry among analysts that the prices for these kinds of drugs are going to come down in the future. And if that happens, profit margins get squeezed, and that $10 billion investment suddenly looks a whole lot tougher to make back. But remember that clever deal structure we talked about? This is where it's so important. That CVR is Pfizer's built-in insurance policy. They're basically saying, look, we'll pay you the full $10 billion, but only if your drugs actually make it to the finish line. It's a smart way to share the risk.
So let's just zoom out for a second and look at the battlefield these companies are fighting on. Why was this one deal so incredibly fierce?
This chart just tells an incredible story. Look at the value that was created for Mitsera's shareholders. In just a couple of months, this bidding war almost doubled the company's value, from about $5.5 billion all the way to $10 billion. If you were an investor in Mitsera, this was an absolute home run.
And this is the reason for the fight. $150 billion. That's the estimate for how big the global obesity drug market could be by the early 2030s. We are talking about one of the biggest market opportunities the pharma industry has ever seen.
So, at the end of the day, Pfizer paid the price of admission. They are now officially in the game. But the real question, the one everyone is asking, is this. In a market already dominated by absolute giants, was that $10 billion ticket just a ticket to get into the stadium? Or is it actually a ticket to win the championship? That is what we're all going to be watching.